Wisdom was defined to me at an early age as looking back at something you've done in your past and remembering if it hurt. What does this have to do with the 2025 5th edition Monster Manual? It's because I've spent decades playing this game, and I have quite a few of the older books. Books I can compare to the latest version. And after reading through it, I have one conclusion.
Not happy at all.
This isn't a good book. There, I said it. Compared to the previous Monster Manuals, I placed this one with 1st edition at the very bottom, and that edition said more about the monsters than this one, despite it being the smallest of all the monster books. For an edition that has been long criticized for providing little to the DMs running it, this revision of 5th edition has somehow gotten worse.
I didn't think you would make the same mistake twice. And you didn't.
But wait as I hear you scream in protest. This is supposed to be one of the best monster books ever. The one that saves the poorly designed creatures of 2014. Look at all the impressive art. Yes, there is some lovely art. The problem isn't the art. Well, not how it looks. The first of the myriad problems is that there is far too much art in terms of size. A large amount of the art takes up half its page, leaving nothing for the monster description. This is the Griffin from 5th edition. Granted, this is from the online book, but you can see the description of the Griffin. The full text is 11 lines total. There's a header telling you where they can be found and a one-line summary of the creature that is as useless as often as it tells you something important about the monster.
Would you mind if I changed just one tiny aspect of it?
Which one?
The words?
Now let's look at the previous entry of the Griffin going all the way back to 2nd edition. Instead of 11 lines of description, you have 11 paragraphs. Yes, the art is much smaller, but now you know the ecology of the Griffin, its tactics, its regular activities, and there's even dead space at the bottom. There's a reason why 2nd edition is considered the gold standard for monster manuals. And if you were wondering, and I know you are, the stat block for the Griffin between 2nd and 5th edition is relatively the same size. If you're a new DM, what do you want more to help you run a creature? A half page of art, or a detailed breakdown of how it's going to act and work in combat? The 2014 version of the Griffin gets 2 pieces of art, a larger stat block, and 7 paragraphs detailing the creature. So imagine you're a brand new DM, and you feel how 5th edition is supposed to be easier to run. Then you start looking at the absolute lack of text on the creatures. How are you going to react?
It's nothing!
Art is nice. Art inspires us. We love to have art in our books. There's a reason why I spent thousands of my own dollars to make sure the Mystara Player's Guide had all original art to tickle the memories of older players and inspire the imagination of younger players. But I also knew from my years and years of working on books and magazines that too much art takes away from the fluff and rules people are wanting in the game. If there's not enough art, you end up with a boring textbook with just pages of words. Too much art and you have to sacrifice material for your players. Veteran DMs aren't going to have a problem figuring out what to do with a purple worm. We've played with them before. But a new DM is going to have a hard time figuring out what they're supposed to do with it when the entry for the worm is a whopping 4 lines.
I feel I was denied critical, need to know information.
I know what you're asking, and I would say Caravaggio is my favorite artist from the Renaissance. While not as well known as some of the other masters of the time, you can't look at the realism of his pieces and not be floored on how good he was. I know what you're asking now, and the reason why I think I'm qualified to speak on this subject with any degree of authority was my training in constructing a narrative, specifically when it came to journalism. Remember who, what, when, where, and how. These are the important questions you need to answer when informing someone. Unfortunately, for my reviewer days, a lot of times those questions were often, who was the moron that wrote this? What the hell am I watching? When will the suffering end? Where is the emergency exit? And how am I supposed to summarize this for other people? Some nights I just stared at my keyboard for hours. So take these questions to heart when looking at the monster manual. You can throw out the when question for most monsters. A game usually doesn't present monsters that are extinct. There's a few exceptions, like when were the Carnifex banished, or when did the Blackmoor monsters that were never mentioned again go extinct, but those are rare exceptions. Okay, so who is the monster? Give me a summary of what this thing is and what can it do. Where is the monster? What's its habitat and range? What is the monster? Give me an expanded bit on what this monster can physically do. How does this monster operate? And this is where you talk about the ecology and the interaction with other creatures. Good luck describing that in just 4 lines. The worst part is I've seen these errors in other books before. If you watched my channel, you might remember me complaining loudly about another book with the same issues. Oversized art, increased fonts to hide the fact that it was a rushed job, and that book would be the Etruscan Gazetteer. Now, I will grant the 5th edition Monster Manual doesn't have the massively oversized margins to take up even more space. But the monsters tend to have a lot of dead space on more than a few pages. Dead space is just blank sections of a page where you could have put, I don't know, words. A good chunk of the monster art takes up half the page, leaving us with nothing for meaningful text. If I'm writing a history book about, say, Raphael, it's fine to have lots of his art in the book to showcase that I know what I'm talking about. But if every inch of the book is practically covered with his art...
Yeah, a little too Raph.
That's not a history book. That's a picture book with captions. That falls on the editor. Page layout is complicated, and you have a lot of elements you have to balance. Now, they didn't have to insert paid advertisements like I did, but you have the art, text, and stat block. Stat block is essentially static. You can't make it smaller unless you tweak the words inside, but in general, the size is locked in place. So you have to manage how large the art is versus the amount of text given. If the stat blocks take up too much space on a page, it's often best to kick them to another page and make it a two-page monster. The best thing you can do when deciding the art size is to determine the minimal amount of things you want to discuss with every entry. Then apply this decision to all of them. The Rexon gets the same treatment as the Drow penis flinzer. Then figure out the words and tell the artist what he's got to play with. Filler art is fantastic for this because then you can just pull that out when you get the real art, and the artist knows exactly what space he can play with. Bad things happen if you don't give the writer or artist enough space to fill out the page.
There's not enough runway.
Then there's the removal of humanoids as a racial feature, and I disagree with this game design decision for multiple reasons. First, 5th edition had a major problem with excessive magic that I've discussed in other videos. Turning regular old hobgoblins and lizardmen into fae and elementals doubles down on an already bad decision. Now protection from good and evil suddenly affects your scaly neighbors and the rather rude guys lurking in the dungeon. They didn't want monsters to be humanoids, but that was their best description. Switching humanoids to anything but what they were also flies in the face of established settings where monsters had backgrounds endemic to their world. Minotaurs are all coming from Baphomet now, except for Kryn and Mystara that have entirely different pantheons. Almost all the Mystara creature lore doesn't fit into this new multiverse mumbo-jumbo. Of course, we know what Mystara players think when somebody tries to fit another setting's lore into our own.
You have no power here!
If they wanted more Fae creatures, why not add some older ones? There's a host of creatures from older editions that are waiting to be revisited. You didn't have to cheapen the race by just changing long-existing humanoids into Fae creatures, especially ones that haven't looked like their folklore version for 50 years now. You have Swanmays, Griggs, Atomies, Flitterlings, Brownies, Pukas, She, Wooddrake, Selkies, Nereid, Bogarts, Leshies, Nymphs, God I miss the Nymphs. Quicklings, Redcaps, the Holdul folk from Iceland, not to mention the entireties of the Dwatha Duanan and the Teleth Teague. Is my Irish showing? Well, at least I made the Keeley branch of the family proud. Look at older editions. Goblins tended to be some of the basest and most evil of all the humanoids. 2014 even calls them black-hearted in the opening line of their description. Hey Blix, do you consider yourself black-hearted?
Black as midnight, black as pitch, blacker than the foulest way.
All the 2014 modules had goblins as terrible creatures that would wear your face as a mask as they did their little pookie dance. And now they're chaotic neutral fairies. Consistency matters in fandoms. Just ask Trekkies about the new Klingon look. Fantasy humanoids or magical outsiders are stock professionals with no variation.
Boring.
But you can't make orcs into monsters. They're just as good as humans being knights or nobles or performers. Yes, so good at playing their roles that despite all the racial differences, there is no difference between a human knight, an orc knight, or an elf knight. This is because you can't have biodeterminism in the 5th edition, despite all these creatures being quite varied. You absolutely cannot have the 7-foot-tall angry mound of muscle being able to bench press more than the twiggy tree hugger, who's several feet shorter and 100 pounds lighter on average. Everybody is the same. Unless the orc is a farmer and the elf is a noble, then the elf gets to be smarter than some dumb dirt scratcher, but that's another video. But Wizards already came up with a solution to this problem, and have already forgotten about it. Time to remind them. Remember 3rd edition? Remember the joy when you discovered you could take a bear, add the dire template, the awakened template, and the gelatinous template, then get some boots of springing and striding and then go bouncing here and there and everywhere, until your killjoy of a DM told you no. Despite that moon-faced assassin of joy nixing Sir Barnaby Boing Boing, the point is templates would have solved all these problems. You get a template for all the races. Then when you want an orc brute compared to a half-elf brute, you just make the adjustments and there you go. That is if we had half-elves. Great job nuking the 3rd most popular race in 2014, Wizards, because somebody had a problem with it.
That might be your problem. It's not what you like, it's the consumer.
That just means somebody else is going to make the money, putting them back into the game. Hey, Greyhawk Grognard, there's an idea for your next book. Because at least one of us gets to write books and sell them about their favorite D&D setting, and if it can't be me, it might as well be Joe. Humanoid is a valid classification. It's okay to have bipedal creatures with 2 arms and 2 legs that share a common mentality. You have exceptions, even differing societies of them. But it's relatively common to represent the largest culture as monolithic and write in the exceptions later. The Drow are famous for that, with all of them being backstabbing gits except for Drizzt, who wasn't as much of a backstabbing git as his kin, and that made him special. At least until everybody and his brother copied him for their character. And I will take this opportunity to appreciate stat blocks, as his entry in the 3.5 Forgotten Realms book was 3/4 of a page for all of his rules, including his kitty cat. Nobody misses the walls of text that were over 90% lists of skills and feats. You have your evil society. You have your 4 types of orc monsters, like the one we got in 2014. If you want to add the Mexican-themed Krugel orcs like they did in 5th edition, you just make them another entry. Just because you've got a race of baddies doesn't mean they are a monolithic baddie race. For example, the Romulans for Star Trek are sneaky, sinister, and untrustworthy, but in Deep Space Nine they were the allies of the Federation. It was an alliance of necessity, and the two sides didn't trust each other, but they could work together, then go right back to hating each other. The individual is always the exception. They're not just different cultures of the same race. They are entirely different creatures with alien mindsets based on physical and mental variations. Dwarves tattoo their clan genealogy on the backs of their children at 2 months to preserve their history, because if they wait another month, the child's back hair grows in. Goblins are quite numerous and live in regions inimical to life, so fratricide is a time-honored tradition. I'm not sure why they tried to humanize all the bad guys, but it cheapened their impact, like when they turned Tasha into the Fairy Queen from the Queen of Demons. You can't convince me that she wasn't somebody's obsession over there. She is the mother of Ayus. Dude, you can't fix her. Stop trying. Her long-running affair with Grazit is D&D's most famous toxic, in every sense of the word, relationship. That's what made her interesting. A word on book organization, and this is something I'm very familiar with. If you have a group defined by their adjective, label them as 1 entry. That way, if you have all the dragons in one place, you can put all of their common abilities in a single spot, and you don't have to duplicate it for each version of the dragon. When it comes to entries in the index, list them as a subset of their group and individually. So if you have the Harthul, it's under H, then T. Make it easier for DMs to find things by putting them wherever you think they would look for them. Yes, it's more work for the writer, but your job is to make things easier for the players. If you're going to put a list of all the monsters in alphabetical order, like say on page 379, put the page number behind their name. It's relatively easy and the DMs will appreciate it. Might as well talk about all the alterations to classic monsters, because single-sex creatures aren't a thing in 5th edition anymore. You've got male Medusas, male Dryads, male Harpies, female Satyrs, etc. First off, these are creatures of legend. That's why we're playing with them. If you alter them, it takes away from the stories that made them. If you change them too much, they stop being what they're supposed to be. Plus, you've already established them as particular creatures. It's okay to have something exclusive in some way. Satyrs are the worst parts of Animal House and Shaggy Pants. Dryads and nymphs were their counterparts, both personifying the 2 different genders. But then they decided to gender flip the Merilith, a D&D creation pretty much stolen from the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, into a male version. Look back through all the previous monster manuals. First you had boobs, then you had the Angry Ginger version. The 3rd edition had a really strange take on the Merilith. 4th edition was Nightmare Sexy Fuel. Then they gave her a shirt in 5th edition because the Victorian art style that dominated it that I despised. And now she's a he and he's a frost salamander. Look at that art and tell me whether that's supposed to be a Merilith or a frost salamander based on all the previous takes. I know there's 500 monsters, but if you list them without context or explanation, what's the point? Maybe I'm spoiled from 2nd edition in all its glory, except for the Ring Binder fiasco. Those who remember the launch of the 2nd edition still snicker at that glitch, except for repurchasing the Monstrous Compendium so you actually had a usable monster guide. Nice idea, lousy execution. Throw in all of the Elminster arcologies from Dragon magazines, and it was the glory days of monster design. It's not like Wizards couldn't mimic this. 3rd edition did a decent job of telling us how to use the monsters. And 4th edition was praised for giving players a chance to find out what the monsters could do through skill checks, and again, DMs were told how to use the monsters. Even 5th edition, with its myriad of problems, managed to keep this design choice. Not 5th edition. If you wanted to make a book that gives DMs more tools to help them create encounters and build dungeons, then you failed with this one. This is the equivalent of giving somebody a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle without the cover and telling them they now have a copy of A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jote by Zerot. They just have to put it together. More experienced DMs aren't going to have a problem doing this because they know how. Yes, they will have to do the work that you should have done for them, but they will do the work. New DMs will get frustrated at the block of monsters with no instructions and turn over the DM duties to somebody else. And you want to know why there's a shortage of dungeon masters. This game has a reputation for complexity, and this monster manual has made it worse. I have been ranting for way too long. To summarize,
I am very disappointed!
5th edition has almost no actual descriptions and details of almost all the monsters. The art takes up so much space that it's borderline padding. The changes to humanoids in the game were unnecessary and it attempted to fix problems the game didn't have. There are far too many monsters that are just variations of each other, and there is no differentiation between the professional monsters, and the changes to classic monsters take away from the actual lore that the game has been built around. I don't know if these choices were intentional or a rushed job or just a design by committee. I know the book was supposed to hit shelves last year, but that didn't happen. So those are my thoughts. I think this is easily one of the worst monster manuals created for the game. I'd put it at second worst. And I can fix it, but I don't think they can afford me. I can barely afford me.